Hello, I'm JoAnn Falletta, Music Director of the Buffalo Philharmonic, sharing the good news with you that we are about to celebrate the 100th anniversary of one of our beloved music directors, Lukas Foss. Lukas was born August 15, 1922, and on October 3rd, we will be celebrating that 100th year at Carnegie Hall with a program in his honor. Now, why Lukas? We have a long legacy of great music directors. But Lukas was different. Lukas was a person who really put Buffalo on the map. He was a maverick. He was a changer. He was a force of nature. He was the kind of person who made a difference. And he believed so strongly in new music. He believed so strongly in young composers that through his work with the Buffalo Philharmonic and at UB, at University of Buffalo, he actually made Buffalo the epicenter of the new music world. And our orchestra became known for the wildest imaginative programs of new music that was happening anywhere. So we're very proud of him. We're proud to celebrate him, to remind people of the triple threat that this man was: a great composer, a great conductor, and a great pianist. I met Lukas in 1985 when I became the associate conductor of the Milwaukee Symphony, where he was music director at that time. And I always thought it was very open-minded that he was willing to accept a woman at that time as an associate conductor. But I got to know him very well. We went on tour together to Europe. We went on state tours all over Wisconsin. I spent a lot of time watching him write, listening to his stories. And many of those stories were about the Buffalo Philharmonic. He talked about the orchestra constantly. That seemed to be, in a way, his musical home. What he did here in the years from 1963 to 1971, when he was music director, formed the happiest part of his life. And he felt free to really be creative and to do things that he would not have been able to do anywhere else. So little did I ever expect that I would be working with the Buffalo Philharmonic, listening to those incredible stories of Lukas's exploits in Buffalo. But in celebrating his 100th, we have to celebrate the man, the person that he was. And I'd like to invite his very, very dear friend, my musical colleague, Cellist Monte Hoffman, to join us. Probably of all the musicians in the Buffalo Philharmonic, Monte was the one closest to Lukas and the one Lukas loved the best. So he has stories about Lukas that no one else can tell. Welcome, Monte.
Thank you, JoAnn. I met Lukas in 1964 at my audition in New York City at a hotel.
So you auditioned in New York City then, not up here
They
in Buffalo?
auditioned at different places at that time. And another close friend was Jesse Levine, who was the principal violist in Buffalo for many years and became my best friend. And I was ready for my audition. I see this guy running around in the back of the hall. I thought it was the janitor. I didn't know. It was Lukas. And that's how I met Lukas. And he hired me then. And I came here. And I remember at the very first rehearsal, he started off with playing the Grosse Fuge, Beethoven Quartet, for the string section. It's never been played since. But he always had this ability to do unusual things that nobody else did. And to meet a near genius like Lukas is pretty rare. And his near genius was in music. He went to Curtis. He wanted to be a quadruple major, but they wouldn't let him. So he was, as JoAnn said, piano, composition, and conducting. But he also played the flute. And he was good friends with Bernstein at that point in his life. And they were probably the two most brilliant people at Curtis at that time.
They were.
And they were always good friends. And the year before I made this orchestra, he came in 1963 and I started in 64. Bernstein conducted the orchestra. But later on, a couple of years later, Lukas conducted a piece called The Age of Anxiety by Bernstein. It's a very difficult piece, and it's a piano and orchestra, and he called up Bernstein and said, is it possible to play the piano and conduct it at the same time. And Bernstein said no, but do it anyway. And he
knew
did.
him.
And he did.
I know he did it.
And
He
so
became
different
famous
meters at
for
the
that.
same time.
He became very famous for that. I mean,
Oh, is that true?
Yeah. Oh, yes. People talked about it because it wasn't possible, and somehow Lukas did it. Now, Monty, this was your first professional job. I mean, you were
Well,
very
I was
young.
in the Eastman Philharmonic, which was a great orchestra
Right.
for 4 years. This was my first. Well, no, I used to play, believe it or not, Miss America. I'm from Atlantic City. I played Miss America and Frank Sinatra and all that stuff when I was in high school.
But this, I mean,
But this
when
was my
you joined,
first
your
really
serious
professional job.
job. So everything you did with Lukas was like an adventure for you. Did you realize what kind of a genius you had in front
I
of you?
didn't realize that we became such close friends. We hung out all the time. And some of the stories I can't tell, as you told me, and but a lot of them I could. Well, one of my favorite stories, Lukas couldn't remember names. Now, JoAnn, I feel that you're the kind of person, or you are the person, that if you go to a concert or you go to a different orchestra, you probably know everybody's name before you get there. Is that true?
Well, I like to because I like to know who they are. But
Well, he's the opposite. And he would be in this orchestra after about 6 or 7 years, and I think he knew 3 people by name, Jesse Levine, Ed Jasinski, and myself. And one very famous story is, Normal Street is the side street we go down to get into the orchestra. And he was going down it the wrong way. And he hits a car. This is 7 years that he had been here. He hits a car and he gets out of the car and he goes over to the other car and he says, "I'm terribly sorry. Is it possible that I could see you after the concert? I'm Lukas Foss." And the other guy says, "I know, I'm in the orchestra." And that was Lukas. That was
maybe he was
Lukas.
rattled.
Huh?
Maybe he was a little rattled. But, you know, he just didn't concentrate on things that other people concentrated on. But what was going on in his mind was amazing.
He's in another world.
Yeah.
We played one concert, I'll never forget, all avant-garde music. Now, this was the mecca of avant-garde music, literally in the world, right? And he'd had all these great composers, John Cage, all of them. And we had one concert, and I'll never forget that after each piece, the audience booed. And I'm not used to that. And then he had one piece in there that anybody could play at any speed at any time they wanted. And I had told my stand partner at the time, I bet I can be the last one to play. Unfortunately, I chickened out on that. But I was second to last.
He believed so much in young composers. I remember when I was in Milwaukee with him, he brought John Adams for the world premiere of The Chairman Dances.
It's the Nixon?
Well, yeah, but this was the piece, the orchestra piece from it, The Chairman Dances, which has become an American classic now. Every orchestra plays it. It was the very first performance of it, and it was difficult, Monty. But that's the kind of thing he did. He wasn't afraid of difficult things, and he helped so
And he
many
rehearsed
composers. He rehearsed them.
A lot of conductors would maybe give 1 or 2 rehearsals. He rehearsed them.
He believed in new music, and
Well,
it
he
wasn't
was-
only his music. He believed in new music.
And he was at UB. He was at Boston University or something, maybe.
He was, and you know, he
But, you know-
conducted in Brooklyn. I mean, he was all over. But
Milwaukee with you.
Milwaukee, yeah.
You both got lucky.
Oh,
He got lucky to
I
get
consider-
you, and he
Well, I consider it one of the greatest gifts that I got that I didn't know at that point
start
when
with.
to start working with him. When I used to watch him in Milwaukee rehearsing the orchestra, because I was always there as his associate, it was like watching the mind of a composer. I mean, he would be listening and looking, and I could think that he was maybe reimagining how he would change it.
Which he did.
He did. Tchaikovsky, piece by Tchaikovsky, he said to the clarinet section, "Where's the E-flat clarinet?" And Russ Dagan, the great Russ Dagan, said,
I knew Russ.
Russ said to him, "Oh, Lukas, there's no E-flat clarinet in this piece." And Lukas, with this twinkle in his eye, said,
Now there is.
"There should be." As a composer, I mean, he was always thinking that way. And this, to me, was astonishing how his mind worked. And you tell me, too,
Well, the
what
great
kind
story
of an
about-
ear he had.
He had the greatest ear. He would come over to my house a lot and then smash the piano down. And he would name every single note all the way up. I didn't know too many people like that. We did the Brahms Requiem. And he felt that any great composer wouldn't mind another composer changing their music around. I don't know about that, but that's how he felt. So we rehearsed the Brahms Requiem. He changed all of the movements differently and stuff like that. And he played it at the concert like that. And he was staying at the Lenox Hotel, which is down the street from us. Mm-hmm. And when he got back to the Lenox Hotel, the porter went up to him and said, I have a note for you. And Lukas read the note and said, Brahms turned over in his grave tonight. And he went over to the porter and he said, can you describe the person who gave you this note? And he described Brahms.
That's so wonderful.
Lukas loved that.
I'm sure he would love it.
I love that.
You know, he was always up for a good story or a good joke, and he didn't take himself too seriously in a way, even though he was a great genius. And I loved seeing him with Bernstein because when I was in Milwaukee, Bernstein spent an entire week with the Milwaukee Symphony because Lukas asked him.
That's unusual.
The entire week, and speaking with all of us and having dinner with us and smoking and drinking. But he adored Lukas. And we always referred to him as a truly authentic genius, which he was. And, Lukas was a little younger than Bernstein, and I think kind of looked up to him, as maybe a big brother or something.
At his memorial service, I think Bernstein's daughter gave a speech, and Michael gave wrote a letter.
Tilson Thomas, yeah.
And it was in New York, and I'll never forget, there was a solo violinist at the end. I went downstairs and it was Itzhak Perlman playing.
Yeah.
I mean, he
knew everyone.
He demanded respect naturally. How could you not like? I mean, I loved him. I was so spoiled to have somebody like Lukas to start with.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was terrible when he left for me.
Yeah, I know you missed him. I miss him a lot too. But I remember these stories he told me. This is when he was very young and he was working as the pianist in the Boston Symphony. Kusevitsky conducted Bartok's Concerto for Orchestra, and Bartok was there. And Lukas was
really.
Yeah, Bartok was there. This was an important premiere. And at the end of the run through in the dress rehearsal, Lukas turned to Bela Bartok and said, well, the ending doesn't really work, does it? No, you can imagine Lukas saying this. And I said to him, Lukas, what did Bartok say? He said, he was very angry.
He was angry?
He was very angry because it was his great opus. But, Monty, when the piece was published a few months later,
He changed
the ending. There was an alternate ending, which is probably what Lukas would have written. So it was he was just an amazing, amazing genius, but not always.
We don't meet people like that.
No, and sometimes he would just speak out without thinking, and he had a tumultuous life in other ways too. You saw more of him in Buffalo with.
I'm so glad that you're making a big deal for his 100th birthday. He deserves it.
It is a big deal. And my hope is in giving this concert at Carnegie on October 3rd, and it's a free concert.
That's what I heard.
Trinity Church has decided to give this as a gift to New York, that people will start to play this wonderful music again, because it is wonderful. And
he's sort of lost.
He's lost. He was a champion of so many people, but he needs champions now. I don't want the great music he wrote to disappear, as you don't either.
He's lucky he got you in the beginning, because you remember and you champion him now, 100 years later.
I love his music. I remember on that tour to Europe, which is one of the first things I did with the orchestra, he was behind on delivering the flute concerto, the Renaissance concerto. I don't know if you heard Carol Winston's
I was on the beginning of it.
Yeah, so he was very late. I think it was going to be in the fall, and this was, he had a few months. So every spare moment he was writing that Renaissance concerto. And I had given him, it's a great piece. He had asked me for, because he knew I played the lute, a book of lute songs so that he could just get the flavor of that period. And he used that little Noah Greenberg book I gave him. And he'd play for me, what do you think of this? On the piano. And then I'm going to do this. And there was always something a little shocking. You know how this is, just when you thought he was finished, he'd jump up and 3 octaves or something. But he was filled with delight. When he was writing, he was just filled with a kind of charm.
We were eating at the place, it's a restaurant in Buffalo, the two of us, and he realized about an hour and a half that he should maybe come to the orchestra and practice. He hadn't practiced in a couple of weeks. I said, how can you do that? I would be nervous out of my mind. And he was playing, I think, a Bach concerto or Mozart something. And he was eating chicken. and his hands were somewhat greasy, and he started practicing the piano with his greasy fingers. And I said, Lukas, can you play that without using your pinkies? Your pinkies? So he used the 8 fingers instead of the pinkies. He did it.
Right.
I mean, he had that ability.
Well,
But
he was
I don't know
up,
anybody
he was up
that
for a
has it.
challenge. No,
Huh?
he was a great
But
pianist.
with humor.
Great pianist.
I mean,
best sense
he
of
wasn't
humor.
insulted ever.
No, I never saw him angry. Monty, now that you mention it, I
No.
never saw him angry. Disappointed sometimes. I remember once
I don't even remember that.
in Milwaukee, we were playing a piece, and the people who weren't in some of the movements, it was a Mozart symphony, the people who weren't in some of the movements were going off stage while they didn't play. And Lukas said to them, I don't understand why it wouldn't be better to just sit on stage and listen to Mozart. Because, of course, he thought there was nothing greater, so just that
I think his favorite composer, do you know who I think it was?
Well, Tchaikovsky.
Schubert.
Schubert.
Well, I don't know. He told me, he used to say he loved Schubert.
I know he loved Schubert, he loved Mozart. And
Yeah,
he
well, how
loved
can you
Tchaikovsky.
not?
So, but
Can you imagine spending a day with Mozart? That's how I felt spending a day. Well, we go into and I would just sit in his room and he'd be composing. I mean, he's not Mozart, but the thing is still, for me, it was a big thing.
yeah, no, for me too, just to be in his presence and to see that imagination. And you could see it in his face, but he was also sometimes quite naughty. I mean, I remember that in Milwaukee,
Understatement.
he was such a genius. He was always being asked to give speeches at the university or, a certain music club, and he never liked to prepare. And the orchestra knew he didn't like that. The management knew that.
That was another thing.
They knew that, but he had to do it sometime. And I remember once I went with him just to keep him company, and he was supposed to give a very serious speech, and there were hundreds of people there. There were hundreds of people in that room. He was introduced to, very flowery introduction. He was about to give an hour-long speech, and he said, "Any questions?" And that was Lukas. And I could see the management of the Milwaukee Symphony going, that was it. I mean,
It didn't matter.
But, to him,
He was honest.
He was honest. And actually, it became a very interesting discussion because people did ask questions, but he didn't always prepare in advance, but he was so brilliant that it was okay. But what about the audiences, Monty, here in Buffalo?
Well,
did they were they intrigued? Were they horrified?
Let's
or
put it
both?
this way. I don't think the audience grew that much in the years that he was here. But there was a group of people that just loved it, and they were very proud to be in Buffalo because of his genius and bringing the world to Buffalo.
Right, and we are all proud of that. And to tell you the truth, I know people who've said to me, well, we didn't like everything that he did, but we were aware that we had a genius.
You respected it.
Yeah, that he was a genius. We understood that we had this very special person as our music director.
I got to give credit. I got to give credit to the committee that hired him, because they've hired. I mean, look at the conductors that this orchestra's had. I mean, really.
Yeah.
JoAnn, think about it.
No,
I was under 6 of them.
Yeah, it was a great. Well, you've seen a lot.
Well, Cindy
But
and Michael.
but at that time, Lukas was the most brilliant choice they could have made, because the world was on the verge of something new. No other orchestra would dare do it, but Lukas dared.
I think it really put us on the map in many ways.
He did.
And it's still on the map. And with you have, how many recordings? You have 80 of them out?
We've made a lot of recordings.
Well, because of that, this orchestra is heard all over the world.
Yeah.
And that's because of you.
But and I always tell our audience that I'm able to do unusual music, which, as you know, we've done a lot of unusual things together, in the years you've been playing with us, because of Lukas. I really think that he laid the groundwork for open-mindedness in our audience.
You kept it going.
People heard those wild, aleatoric people.
Yeah, but you're not doing a whole concert of it. You're doing one piece in there.
Yeah, but that's okay. But it meant that they at least approached with we've heard a lot of new things. Why not? And we've been able to do a lot of unusual composers because of Lukas. So I owe him that too, I think. I always felt that what he did in Buffalo was the most special to him.
And he also remembered that too. He's one of the conductors that left Buffalo, that remembered Buffalo.
Yes, he loved Buffalo.
Huh.
He always
We had a good
talking
time
about
at Buffalo, I'm telling you right now.
Well, some of those things we can't say, but he did enjoy himself, and he did live here. I know he had an apartment always in New York, but he did spend a lot of
It
time
was, I
here.
think, 95th and 5th, I think. I was in this one.
Yeah, and he had a studio. He actually had two apartments. The home
Yeah,
where he lived with
right.
Cornelia, and Cornelia was up here in Buffalo a lot. His wife.
This is not my story. This was actually published. And Glenn Gould would come up to Buffalo. Just once I met him. And he was backstage. And Glenn Gould had phobias beyond belief. If you touched him, he went crazy. But he was also probably one of the great pianists that ever lived, especially Bach and Mozart and stuff like that. He lived in Toronto. And Cornelia decided that she was going to leave Lukas and to go to Toronto and live with Glenn Gould. They went in the car, and Lukas goes out of the house, and he has a smile on his face. And Cornelia says to him, "Lukas, why are you smiling? I'm leaving you for Glenn Gould." And he looked at her and he says, "He'll be back."
Well, she did come back.
5 years later, I think she did come back. But that was Lukas.
Yeah.
He was so open-minded. It was what about the one when I first met him? A meeting in a restaurant. It was like literally the first week I was in the orchestra, and maybe 8 or 10 of us from the orchestra were eating there. And all of a sudden I see Lukas running out of the kitchen with a hamburger. He had gone into the kitchen, grabbed the hamburger. He didn't want to wait. And they chased him out of the place. That's our conductor. I mean, I watched him run out of the restaurant with a hamburger in his hand.
Yeah.
I don't know if they caught him or not, but the thing is, I couldn't believe it.
Well, you couldn't stop him. There's one really wonderful, frightening, but at that time, but wonderful story about him at the Concertgebouw, because one of the great things is that, imagine I was still in school and I was going on tour to Europe with the Milwaukee Symphony, and one of the places we played was the Concertgebouw. The concert wasn't starting. The orchestra was on stage, and it was like 10 minutes past, 15 minutes past. The manager had gone back and looked for Lukas. He was lost, Monty. He had gone down a flight of steps and then turned in the wrong direction, opened the doorway, and no one could find him. He was totally lost in the bowels of the Concertgebouw. He couldn't find his way to the stage.
What happened?
So they found him eventually, and we started
I have
the
another
concert.
story like that. We were playing, I think, Howard University. And it was noisy out there in the audience. And he refused to stop for like 20 minutes. You can imagine. We went overtime. They had to pay us overtime. That's the only thing I really liked about that.
Well, once didn't he refuse to start a concert because the air conditioning was so loud?
That was it.
Oh, that was it. Yeah. The air conditioning was deafening, and he just sat on the podium and waited for it to be shut off.
Can you imagine? I'm looking at my clock. I said, "This is going overtime."
Well, with the term enfant terrible applied to Lukas. I mean, he was, he could get away with anything, and
Well,
he did.
more or less.
But
More or less, he gets away with it. Well, he was charming.
he was really very charming and very lovable and a unique mind. For me, it was very special to come here and as music director and to feel his influence. Almost like his footprints were still here. And to know that he loved it, because when he was telling me about his time in Buffalo, we were both in Milwaukee, and he had no idea that I would ever go to Buffalo or be in Buffalo. He was sincerely telling me how much he loved this place.
Well, you brought him back at the end.
Oh yeah, he came back for actually was a festival.
He played a quartet. He played chamber music,
Yes,
and he also
and he
conducted.
played a Bach piano concerto.
Oh, he did?
Yeah, and we had the chorus sang. He composed from so many directions.
I'm going to tell you how I really sort of didn't know him. We hung out all the time, and he came over to my house to practice. He was doing Schumann something. And I watched him practice. It was unique. I mean, just how he practiced, what he had to practice technically to make it work. He didn't have to play the whole piece.
No.
Just maybe bits and pieces. It was a beautiful concert he played. I mean, he could do that.
He must have had a very disciplined mind when it came to music. He knew exactly what was needed.
He was different than us in certain ways.
He was unique.
I was so thrilled to have him, and you were thrilled, and you were lucky too.
I was very.
That's
lucky.
how you started with him,
and I was lucky,
started
Monty,
with him.
to work with you because you were in some ways for me, the history of this orchestra. I mean, as you said, you worked with 6 different music directors, and you knew them all well.
I was very close with all these conductors.
And I was able to sort of like glimpse back at what had led the orchestra through all these years, and made it what it is, which is a unique sounding orchestra. You know, it's partly very European because of this hall and because of its beginnings with European maestros, but also very American and muscular because of Michael and Lukas.
I love this city, and I love the people in this city.
It's a special place, and I think that's why we can retain musicians here, because they do love living here. Anyway, Monte, I want to thank you for sharing this with us.
I've been looking for this moment
and
for a month.
I have so enjoyed it, and I'm sure we've left some things out. Maybe we'll finish it up.
We're going to leave a lot more out.
I know. But I know you'll be there supporting us on October 3rd when we play this wonderful concert.
In New York?
In New York.
I'll go.